And welcome back to Whiskey Politics. I'm Dave Sussman, your host and purveyor at whiskeypolitics.net. You can find us at America's Voice News. Also, you can, if you are watching us on YouTube, hit that subscribe button and also hit the notification bell so others, you can hear about our other interviews. Podcast, you can hear us on all of your favorites. Ricochet Audio Network, as well as iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play, and hit that 5 stars on the iTunes if you are listening there. We are, in a place right now, I call it a very strange place in relation to relationships, men and women. And we were talking recently, if you haven't watched the episode with Deanna Lorraine, very interesting discussion with how we're able to even talk together anymore and how it's impacting relationships. And we talked briefly about men's right advocacy, and I wanted to talk with a person that is well known for MRA, men's rights advocacy, and a person that has been, I would say, at least the word is controversial, Karen Straughan, who is joining us from Edmonton, Canada. She is a men's rights activist. You've seen her all over the media, including recently on Dr. Drew, her YouTube channel. Hey, welcome, Karen. How you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing all right. Thanks for having me. And thanks for giving me a flattering introduction. I always like that. So,
well, you listen, I wanted to, kind of introduce who you are. A lot of our listeners and viewers may not even be aware of men's rights activists and advocacy. I learned about you. I saw a few YouTubes of yours over the years, but where I was really impressed was in the movie Red Pilled, right?
Yeah.
So great movie. I think folks can find that on Amazon. So for our listeners and viewers, what is men's rights? What is a men's rights activist? What is your focus?
What do we do? Okay, so there are legal rights issues that need addressing. Things like fairness in divorce. There is a blanket mother bias in child custody issues. Erosion of due process in particularly in areas where men come into conflict with women, where women are perceived by the culture to be the victims of men. So sexual assault, domestic violence, those kinds of things. Access to resources, including access to domestic violence victim services for men. Those are legal issues and political issues that we deal with. And then there are social issues. So, we see a lot of man bashing in the culture. We see a lot of articles where, fairly highly situated women can, ask the rhetorical question in an opinion piece at the Washington Post, why can't we hate men? Why can't we? They're horrible. And so there are cultural issues that go along with that, and they're all kind of tied together, right? So some of the bias in the legal system, one of which is, I think it was Sonia Starr a few years ago, did an analysis of federal criminal trials and found that in addition to other biases, when convicted of the same crime under the same circumstances with the same background, they were twice as likely to be incarcerated, sentenced to incarceration. And when they were incarcerated, they served 62% longer sentences than women did for the exact same crimes, right? So that's not necessarily a matter of an institutional, a statutory bias. It's not that there's some law that says men should get heavier sentencing than women do, but it is an informal bias that plays out in the decisions of judges and juries and prosecutors and even police investigators, all the way from being stopped by police to being sentenced. Women have a series of informal discounts through the process. And then what I find most amazing is that many people will essentially justify that harsher treatment by saying, well, men are more likely to be criminal. Well, but how do we know that if women are, less likely to be stopped, less likely to be arrested, less likely to be charged, more likely to have their charges reduced, they're offered better plea deals, they're less likely to be convicted, and they are less likely to be sentenced to incarceration? How do we know that the prison population, the ratio of men to women, is anywhere near where it should be? for you to be saying, well, men are the majority in prison, and that justifies treating them more harshly in the criminal justice system. So it's this weird circular argument that I get a lot of the time from people who are sort of promoting the status quo there. So
you're focusing on the criminal situation regarding, the ratio, I guess. You see that across the board and across all societal measures, correct? It isn't just in the criminal
yeah.
justice system.
Yeah, I think, like the gap in the criminal justice system, the gender gap is 6 times wider than the gap between blacks and whites, right? So that really gives you an indication of just how serious that gap is, just how extreme it is. We automatically see that sort of the 10% harsher treatment of black defendants compared to white ones. We see that as obvious evidence of bias. And we also see the lower life expectancies of blacks and the more tenuous access to housing and healthcare that they have, and their rates of victimization in terms of violence and things like that. We see all of those as obvious examples of why we should consider blacks to be marginalized or blacks to have disadvantages within the broader culture and within our institutions, right? But on pretty much every metric that you would use to say blacks are disadvantaged in our culture, men are actually disadvantaged compared to women, and in some cases they are even more. Those disadvantages are even greater than when comparing whites to blacks, and they have always, in some cases, been that way. So like you're looking at a situation where things are very, very complicated, but the culture seems to want to slap a "that's male privilege backfiring" sticker on it and just declare that all the work done. So
a lot of folks that are watching and listening to this, maybe male, they will say, "Hey, look, I don't feel oppressed. What is a men's rights activist? I feel like I've got pretty much everything I need." How do you answer that?
Well, I answer that by saying, just wait till you get into family court. If your ex is in any way combative, or she does not want to share custody, or she does not want to be fair with you in terms of assets or alimony or child support, she's going to have a significant advantage. And that I don't think, I personally really try to stay away from words like oppressed, right? I think that's a really, really loaded word, and I don't tend to use it. And I don't feel that women are oppressed in our culture, and I don't feel that men in general experience oppression in our culture. There may be times and places where they are experiencing oppression based on sex, but as a blanket state of their general condition, I don't think so. So I'm happy if you don't feel oppressed. That means that nothing bad's happened to you, which is great. Like, nothing's bad. You haven't had the whole system come down on you because your ex-wife said you did something to your children or to her. You haven't faced any of that bias within the criminal justice system, within family courts. You haven't ever had to call police because your wife was throwing, small appliances at you, and you called the cops, and you haven't been arrested. You haven't experienced being the one arrested in a case like that. I'm glad, right? But that doesn't mean that these things don't happen. It doesn't mean that they aren't systemic. So,
in a couple of minutes left before our first break, what are some of the, do you have any measures of how men are dealing with whether it's family law court or criminal justice court, as you were just referring to, where there are some blatant, injustice just because they are male?
Oh, well, child custody is a major one, and it's extremely easy. I was watching actually a prosecutor give a sort of a professional development speech to attorneys in a county in Texas the other day, where she essentially says, if you want to, I know that all of you have filed a protection order, and most of you have filed it through the prosecutor's office. I'm here to tell you, don't do that, because if you file it through the family courts, it'll give you a leg up in divorce proceedings, right? And I don't want to deal with the criminal. It's a lot of work for me to deal with the criminal aspect of that. but you can use it as a tool, a leverage way of leveraging more custody, more alimony, more child support out of the other spouse in your divorce case. So.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. And I want to get further into this as we move further into this interview here, but feminists aren't very happy with you, are they?
Yeah, they don't like me. So,
What's
um,
some of the pushback that you've received?
oh God, like some of it's absolutely crazy. I had this one feminist who used to leave these like giant walls of super crazy text in the comments under my videos. And one day she actually, I would occasionally respond just to see how crazy she would get.
Yeah.
And I'm always very civil, and but you just poke a little, and then they let the crazy pour out. And she actually came out and said, "You've probably been teaching your daughter uh, to sexually pleasure men since she was 10 years old, since that's obviously all you think women are good for." And
Ugh.
and I was just I just responded like, "What?" And then I guess she either had the shame, in the necessary shame to
Yeah. Yeah.
edit that comment and delete that out of it. But yeah, I mean, like they really don't like me, and the
Yeah. Yeah.
crazier they are, the less they like me. So.
Well, we're going to talk a lot more about this as well as what just happened with Christina Blasey-Ford, an interesting development there. You may remember her from the Kavanaugh hearings, and we'll return right back here with Karen Straughan on Whiskey Politics. And welcome back to Whiskey Politics. And if you haven't already subscribed to us at iTunes, make sure you click that subscribe button as well as YouTube. And we're here with Karen Straughan, who's a men's rights activist. And I was absolutely stunned watching the Kavanaugh hearings, like you're North American. We were all just glued to our TV screens to see exactly how I think the idea of due process was thrown out of the window. Well, an interesting development just happened, and you had some thoughts on this, and that was Dr. Christine Blasey-Ford was just nominated, and I just want to make sure I get this, Inspiration of the Year,
Yeah,
Sports Illustrated.
no, she was actually chosen. The woman who received that award was Rachel Donlinger. I can't remember her last name.
That was the gymnast, right? That
Yeah,
was
the
sexually
gymnast.
abused?
Yeah, she brought down Dr. Nasser.
Yes.
And so I would absolutely 100% separate these two things. I think that particular choice of who to present that award to was absolutely spot on. It does take a lot of courage to do that. And she came forward, and this whole thing was blown wide open, and he was taken down. Great, perfect, wonderful, absolutely just. She deserves the award, right? But they chose Christine Blasey-Ford to present the award to her. And I think if the goal is to encourage or empower women to come forward when they've been sexually abused, particularly in cases where there's just ongoing abuse by people in positions of authority and trust, like Dr. Nasser. The last person you want to use there is somebody whose single dubious accusations just failed so spectacularly on a national stage in front of the entire country. And you would also not want to use somebody, because preventing sexual abuse and punishing sexual abusers, it should be a nonpartisan issue. It should be completely both sides of the aisle. We want to prevent this, and we want to punish it when it happens, right? But the way that Blasey-Ford's accusation was handled was such a partisan circus, right? That by choosing her to present this award, what you're doing is you're taking a highly charged partisan person who failed in making her accusations stick. So she's no example for women to, as in terms of, why you should come forward. So it's a stupid decision all around, and they can't help but alienate half their audience, because the feelings about Blasey-Ford's accusations and Kavanaugh's confirmation were divided so distinctly down party lines. Like, me as a men's advocate, and an advocate in particular for due process. Um, I don't have particularly, what you would call ultra conservative views, right? I am slightly to the right of center, but I think Roe v. Wade was a stupid. It was based on a stupid premise, but I believe it should exist, right? That the right to abortion should exist. So, I mean, like, I'm not your typical person who'd be like, yeah, I'm super super conservative, polarized, right wing. But I'm watching this, and I'm watching how the Democrats handled the accusation, how they essentially went out of their way to turn into a public circus, how they essentially threw Dr. Ford, under the bus in doing so, and made her a public figure when she did not want to be, and they had every ability to not do that, to go a different route with this accusation and still see it addressed. So, I mean, like, you're looking at this massive, massive, I guess, just crap fest, on the national stage. It's an absolute circus, and then they take this highly controversial figure who has been discredited in the minds of half the U.S. population and half the North American population, including me. I don't find her credible at all, and you're tainting this, what otherwise would be an award that is properly given to somebody who is absolutely deserving of it. So I just think it was just
So
ridiculous.
what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're hearing that it's minimizing the actual situation that occurred in Pennsylvania. I think it was correct with the gymnast.
Yes.
All right, and so by taking away from that, I think one of the issues that a lot of people are really struggling with is the fact that this was not a criminal trial, yet the idea of due process was thrown out with Ford, and that, as you said, it was split down party lines to the point where you had the left who just were in a state of frenzy over Kavanaugh,
Mhm.
who, by the way, just voted with Planned Parenthood.
Yeah.
How ironic was that?
Oh yeah, no, I knew he would. I mean, like,
Right.
this is the thing, like, I actually looked at his judicial record, right? And his judicial record clearly shows that he doesn't allow maybe his personal feelings to get in the way of his interpretation of the Constitution and the existing case law and statutes, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, he's absolutely probably one of the best people that the liberals and the leftists could want as a conservative pick for the bench, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of pearl clutching right now with conservatives. They're wondering if he's going to turn into another David Souter, justice from George H.W. Bush in the 90s, who turned out to really disappoint conservatives. But what I want to get into right after this upcoming break here is the idea that have feminists gotten to the point where they are so politically aligned with one party that they are willing to throw out this idea of due process, of the idea of they want to push this idea that believe all women, and whether or not that's actually dangerous for their movement, because you get people right of center, left of center, moderate people like us. I lump myself in there with you as taking a look at this and shaking my head and saying common sense has been thrown out of the window, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, like, since the Magna Carta, we have essentially established one of the most brilliant legal systems in the world in countries based on British common law, who share a legal tradition with British common law. So Canada, the US, Australia, New Zealand, the UK, all of those countries have developed this idea of due process. They've enshrined it, and that's not even to protect innocent people from being found guilty. It's to protect all of us from state overreach.
Right.
It's to protect this. It's to prevent the state from becoming an agent of oppression, and that's what they're opening the door to. In Canada, God, I could tell you some horror stories.
Well, let's talk about that right after the break. We will be right back here with Karen Straughan. And Dave Sussman back with you, Karen Straughan, who's a men's rights activist. Karen, by the way, where can folks find you? More information about you.
You can find me on my infamous YouTube channel, Girl Writes What, or you can just Google my name, Karen Straughan, Straughan, and I'll be the first million hits. Or you can hit me up on Twitter at Girl Writes What.
Great. We were just talking about the whole Kavanaugh experience, Blasey-Ford, Dr. Christina Blasey-Ford. And we were just talking about, you were referring to the due process rights that most people, believe should be an integral part of our society, our culture, our protections. What do you think the impact is going to be of what took place with the Kavanaugh hearings and this continuation now of Believe All Women, the Me Too movement, if you will?
Well, I mean, this is the culmination of a bunch of sort of legal and cultural reforms that have happened over the last probably 40 years. Began with rape shield protections, so the rape shield test, certain forms of evidence are inadmissible unless refusing to admit them into the courtroom would deny a defendant his constitutional right to a fair trial and to mounting a defense. So we have all of these changes that have been put forth in the law and in policy to make it easier and easier on complainants to come forward and easier to convict defendants. So and we also have, legal innovations like, temporary restraining orders or temporary orders of protection that you can get in ex parte hearings without any evidence of abuse or violence. You can actually even just go in and tell a justice of the peace or a judge, I'm scared he might become violent. And if you're convincing enough, within 3 to 8 minutes, you're going to have your emergency order of protection. That gets him out of the house and really gives you a leg up in the divorce. So we have all of these legal innovations that really bypass due process in these areas where women are perceived as victims of men. And in Canada, we just had a bill passed that extends rape shield protections, extends the rape shield test to any communication of a sexual nature or for a sexual purpose. And we also have this bill, it just passed, the Senate just passed it. It also would instantiate in law an entitlement of complainants to their own legal counsel. So if you know anything about criminal trials, the complainant is not a party to the case. The prosecutor is not the complainant's lawyer. The prosecutor is the people's representative, not the complainant's representative. The complainant is just a witness. And so you would have this situation where even if the prosecutor was exposed to potentially exculpatory evidence that would be presented at trial, and say the judge says, okay, we're going to admit that, we're going to allow it into the trial, the prosecutor is not allowed to disclose any of that. It's actually in serious violation of, it's a serious misconduct for the prosecutor to disclose any of that information to any of their witnesses, including the complaining witness. But in Canada now, the complainant and or her publicly funded attorney, personal attorney, would have standing in rape shield hearings. So these are generally closed hearings where only the prosecutor and the defense and the judge are present. And now the complainant will be there and will be able to review all of the potentially exculpatory evidence. So if she sent him a text message beforehand saying, let's get it on tonight, this is going to be so hot, and then afterwards she sent him a thank you, oh, thank you so much, that was great, let's do it again next weekend, right? She would, and maybe she thinks that he deleted all of that. Maybe she thinks it's 10 years later, he hasn't held on to any of that stuff, right? But if he did, and he wants to get it into the courtroom, she can see that. And we also now have the Canadian Judicial Council offers voluntary, soon to be mandatory training to judges on how to adjudicate sexual assault cases and how to deal with rape myths. And one of the problems with this training is it essentially there was a verdict that came down in a major trial here in Canada where the judge essentially said, well, yes, okay, the women lied on the stand, and they were exposed as having lied on the stand to bolster their cases, and they were found to have colluded with each other even after the police and the prosecutors told them not to speak to each other about the case, and they were intensely vindictive, and sort of out to get this guy in their communications. They really wanted to see him go down and all of this, and they lied on the stand about having colluded. They said they hadn't, and all of this stuff. They misremembered a whole bunch of things. They concealed all of this evidence. They said, oh, we didn't have anything to do with him after we were assaulted, and we didn't have anything to do with him after we were assaulted, when in reality one of them pursued him romantically and sexually for more than a year afterwards. And the whole pattern of those communications was her throwing herself at him and him giving her the polite brush off as much as possible, right? So we had these issues with this, and the judge said everything these complainants did is consistent with the behavior of genuine victims. So even their perjury could not be considered in any way evidence that they were not assaulted. Okay? And the only reason he acquitted the guy was that it was based on the reliability of the testimony. The testimony was unreliable and opened a reasonable doubt, even though it could not be considered evidence that the assaults didn't happen, right? So this guy was trained in this kind of woo way that we have now in terms of policy, right? It's not statutory, it's policy, and best practices, trained to essentially believe that if the woman remembers everything clear as day and gets all of her details right, that's evidence that's consistent with rape. If she forgets everything, changes her story multiple times, gets the date wrong, gets caught in lies, is completely inconsistent, that's also consistent with rape. If she's highly emotional and traumatized, that's consistent with rape, right? If she acts smug or vindictive or angry, that's also consistent with rape. If she shows no emotions at all, that's also consistent with rape. There is no way a complainant can behave. If she lies, if she tells the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth on the stand, consistent with rape. If she lies through her teeth on the stand, also consistent with rape, right? So there is no way a complainant can behave according to this training that is not consistent with rape. So what you're doing is you're essentially between these, oh my God, don't phone me. What you're seeing with these cases is that if a woman is someone who's maliciously lying in her accusation, and she's there at the Rape Shield hearings, looking at all of the exculpatory evidence, knowing what the defense strategy is in advance, right? There's just going to be no way. If she's a malicious liar, there's going to be no way for that guy. So it's literally guaranteed to increase wrongful convictions, literally guaranteed. Because if she's malicious enough to lie about it in the first place, she's certainly malicious enough to alter her testimony to conform with the evidence that she's seen.
We're seeing this filter down in a lot of other areas in our society as well. It's not in just the criminal justice system, but we're also seeing it in schools, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, the Obama administration passed very similar measures through, was it Title IX?
Yes.
How was it administered?
Title IX, there was a Dear Colleague letter that came down, and I believe it was 2011. Where it had no, technically it didn't have any force of law. It was essentially just a bureaucratic fiat that essentially had the force of law, kind of, I mean, it was just as good as being law, because there are only 2 universities in the U.S. that don't take federal funds. Right.
Yeah.
And this essentially said, if you don't comply with this guidance, it's
Hillsdale.
Guidance.
What's the other one?
Oh, I don't remember.
Yeah.
But,
anyway.
Might be that one all-female school that's now looking at maybe closing because they can't secure enough funding. But essentially, what we're looking at is the Obama administration's Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights sent down this guidance. It mandated a preponderance of evidence standard in sexual misconduct adjudications. It essentially put a time limit on, I think it was 60-day time limit on resolving cases. So from complaint to a finding of responsibility or no responsibility, you could not go longer than 60 days. It strongly discouraged, and then in 2014 mandated that complainants could not be cross-examined. There could be no cross-examination of complainants. So we're looking at this issue with, what are realistically star chambers. And, some of these colleges and universities were already way around the bend with this. Some of them at that point, I'd heard of adjudications at that point where the guy was forced to defend himself and prove himself not responsible, but was never told at any point through the process who his accuser was or what the incident was that he was supposed to be defending himself against. Right? He wasn't able or allowed to know those details. And I'm thinking, how do you defend yourself against...
This is a kid in college.
Yeah, as a kid in college. So, and in some cases, it's not even a panel of people who are making the decision. It's one person who performs the role of investigator, fact finder, adjudicator, and, executioner, essentially. That might be one person throughout that whole process. It barred defendants from, or I guess accused, from having legal counsel. It was just absolutely, you can have your legal counsel sitting there in the room, but they can't actually advise you. They can't actually say anything, right?
Right.
So, this is absolutely, absolutely ridiculous. And the excuse is that it's not a criminal proceeding, and therefore there doesn't need to be any due process. But the problem with that is that the schools actually have a contractual obligation to the students who are paying for the services. And so there does actually need to be some process there, some fairness of process. Doesn't need to be a criminal court standard, and then Betsy DeVos, she essentially clawed back a lot of those overreaches. She reinstated cross-examination, said it was essentially fundamental to a fair process. She did not get rid of the preponderance of evidence standard, but she did tell universities that if you're going to use this low standard for sexual misconduct, you're going to use it for everything that you adjudicate, including academic misconduct or plagiarism or theft or whatever, right?
Let's continue with this after our break, because this is really fascinating. And we'll be right back after this break with Karen Straughan. And welcome back to Whiskey Politics, and we are still talking with men's rights activist Karen Straughan. Karen, again, just for folks following you that want to learn more about you, remind them where they can find you.
At Girl Writes What on Twitter, Girl Writes What on YouTube, or just Google my name, and you will find me.
This discussion that we're having right now regarding college campuses, everybody's familiar with the Duke rape case and all these other situations that have come up over the years that really are scary. What are some of the things that people could do to protect themselves in this environment where any accusation by any person today can ruin somebody's life?
Well, there's no way to be 100% safe, right? Like a lot of people say, well, if you don't want to be accused of something, just don't do it, which is kind of ridiculous because...
What you mean, not date people?
Well, what they mean is, if you don't want to... This is the most ridiculous thing that I've heard out of some people's mouths is if you don't want to be falsely accused of rape, don't rape people. And it's like, but if you don't want to be falsely accused of rape, and then, I've come across cases where there was one woman, I believe it was in the UK, she just randomly picked two men that she'd never met they were brothers, off of Facebook, and accused them of sexual assault. They'd never met. And they were arrested and questioned and all of that. And inevitably it came out that she just made the whole thing up. So,
Karen, we saw recently the comedian Aziz Ansari. You familiar with that?
Yeah.
He went on a date
Yeah.
consensual sex, okay? And then a couple of days later, she regretted her decision and came out and ruined this guy's reputation to the point where she said, I didn't consent, or I was pressured and this and that. But I mean, what are we supposed to do as men here? I'm sitting here, I'm thinking to myself,
there's nothing you
what
can
am I
do.
supposed to record everything?
No, because it won't work, because the fact that Lena Dunham still has a career that she actually still is taken somewhat seriously in some circles after she wrote in her memoir about, the Republican, the young college Republican named Barry, in her book, she described the situation as her egging him on, pulling him closer, and essentially talking dirty to him, okay, to encourage him, all as a way to convince herself she was really consenting when she actually wasn't. And she describes that as a rape. And somehow she still has credibility in some areas of public life, right? There is even the affirmative consent standard, which is absolutely, it completely rewrites the entire sexual script. It's completely in non-compliance with the way most adults have sex, particularly adults in established relationships. But they want it to apply to every single thing, every single sexual act, including holding hands or kissing. Oh yeah, you have to ask permission first, and then get an enthusiastic yes before you move forward. And then at every escalation,
yes,
an enthusiastic yes.
That's
yes.
romantic.
Get out your pom-poms, girls, and I hope you don't feel embarrassed, because that's the only way you're getting any. But even that, when you have people like this Grace, not her real name, who accused Aziz Ansari, you have issues where women will say yes when they mean no, or when they would rather say no, or it was a bad experience. So they recontextualize it in their head and they say, well, I would never have, now that I know the outcome and how I feel about it, I would never have done it in the first place. So obviously I didn't consent. And it's like, these feminists, they say that men have a poor understanding of what consent is, right? But when I read romance novels, when I look at, a lot of the erotica for women, when I look at situations in, that these are genres of fiction that are consumed almost entirely by women. And not only that, romance novels, they constitute more than 50% of the fiction market, right? So they outperform all other genres of fiction combined, and they are specifically written almost entirely by women, almost entirely for women. And some of the tropes, some of the plot devices in these involve a woman who was not gray raped, but raped by the hero at the start of the book. But then by the end of the book, I mean, this is controversial, but it's there. You can read it in all of these different books. By the end of the book, he has convinced her that if you knew me then the way you know me now, you would have consented. And then she falls in love with him and they get married and they live happily ever after.
Right.
And, so we have retroactive granting of consent. Then we also have the trope of the sex-starved woman who just it's a historical romance trope, right? Where she can't have sex as an honorable woman with this man, but she's so attracted to him and she's so lonely and blah blah blah. Maybe she's a spinster, maybe she's a widow, and she seduces him and she pressures him to do it. And he tells her, I don't think we should. You're never going to forgive me. And she says, oh, no, I want this. And then the next morning after the deed is done, she's angry with him and she hates him because he should never have let her do that.
Yeah.
Right. He took advantage of her. And I'm thinking to myself, it's women who have a bad understanding of what consent is.
Let's talk more about this. For folks that are watching this on America's Voice News, our session is going to come to an end here. But if you'd like to continue watching or listening on the podcast, we will be continuing here with Karen Straughan.
On that highly controversial note.
A lot of hypocrisy in all of this. But anyway, folks on AVN, thanks for joining us. We'll be back again very soon at Whiskey Politics. And you could continue to follow us at YouTube and your podcast versions to continue to hear this next session. Thanks so much. And welcome back to, I guess we can call this After Hours Whiskey Politics. Karen, you were just telling us about, this, what Hollywood and what the publishing industry has designated as acceptable reading or entertainment. But obviously, I mean, let's talk about, what was that movie series? I forget the name. There's
50 Shades of Grey.
Okay, obviously not in my genre, but when we're talking about 50 Shades, this is putting the idea in women's heads about, I guess, giving it up and being I don't know. Is rape a part of this genre? What are they doing with this?
Oh, it's not technically rape, not in 50 Shades. I don't think that they would have necessarily gotten away with that.
Okay.
Publishers are pretty strict on ensuring that even if the situation starts out non-consensual, by the time penetration occurs, the woman has at least consented in the privacy of her own mind, right? And that.
But it starts out non-consensual.
Sometimes it starts out.
It was a power play in that, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It was a boss and an employee, kind of like a la Clinton, I guess.
Domination and submission. And it was, well, but I mean, here's something that the Me Too movement is really going to have to come to terms with. And they're never going to be able to actually reconcile these two things, right? Is they say that any situation in which the man is in a position of superior status to the woman, she cannot legally consent because the power imbalance vitiates her consent, her ability to consent. So her consent is invalid, right? Okay, well, let's try and reconcile that with the fact that across cultures, it is a human universal that women are hypergamous, that they are more sexually attracted to men of higher status than they are, right? That there is a reason why Tom Jones used to have, multiple pairs of panties thrown at him on the stage. There's a reason why Mick Jagger, who has a face like a sow's bunghole after a round of dysentery, right? Okay, managed to have 4,000 plus sexual partners in his life, right? And it's all about the status. So what
Harvey
you're saying,
Weinstein.
You're not just saying that men of high status cannot have a sex life now. You're also saying that women are prohibited from legally, at least in terms of it being a legal act, a legally permissible act, from being able to have sex with the men that they want to have sex with.
Yeah.
Right? This is absolutely, it just goes so against human nature. And it's essentially what we're looking at is, the thing with Louis C.K., right? I mean, all of that was consensual too. He asked those women, would it be okay if I do this perverted thing in front of you? And they kind of went, sure, I guess, right? And
he wanted to drop his pants and masturbate in front of them, right?
Yeah, and I think the reason that they were upset by that was because when he actually performed those acts, right, which are weird. Right? They're weird.
Really
and they're
weird.
Goofy, and they're indicative of somebody who's insecure, right? He actually lowered his status in their eyes, right? He probably would have gotten away with saying, hey, ladies, would you like to, come have a threesome with me? And they probably would have said yes, because he's a high status guy, and they would have done it, and they wouldn't have felt bad about it. But here they are involved in a sexual act with somebody who's just essentially annihilated his social status in their perceptions.
So, and what is the Me Too movement doing with this? Because you're talking about a lot of mixed messages right here, right? If you are low status, if you don't carry any power, you don't have any money in this world, you can.
Don't even approach a woman. You'll be accused of harassment.
You're dead in the water. Okay, but if you're Harvey Weinstein or Louis C.K., who aren't exactly GQ models, but they've got a pocket full of cash and they
And a
can
lot of
make or
power.
break somebody's career. People are really gingerly. They're like treading on eggshells with this whole issue. What is
Mhm.
the Me Too movement? What is their approach to all of this? How are they trying to deal with this dichotomy, if you will?
Well, the man is always a victimizer, and the woman is always a victim, and that's really how they're putting it. And if she like, if you look at, I forget which of them it was. I think it was Asia Argento. Actually, went into a 4-year consensual relationship with Harvey
Yeah.
Weinstein after the alleged incident where he allegedly non-consensually gave her oral sex, or whatever it was he did. Right. So what you're seeing certain women are willing to play the game until, I think, probably until they hit a certain wall, in terms of their sexual pull. They no longer have the ability to wrap men around their finger, right? And then they all of a sudden regret the things that they did, sexually. In order, you see this with Rose McGowan. She used to wear dental floss on the red carpet, and then once she shaved her head and went full on feminist, she said that the red carpet was like being raped by cameras, and she felt victimized by that. And it's like, well, you didn't have to wear a dress made of dental floss, right? So, like, what I think is really going on here is there's this real push, particularly since women have become an established part of public life, right? So they are out in the public. They are uh, allegedly of equal social and political status to men, and so they're finding themselves in situations where they are perhaps making decisions that are not in their long-term best interest, right? Maybe they're making them because they're swept away emotionally, or maybe they're making them as a calculated decision to get that role in that movie or whatever, right? But they're making these decisions they later regret. And this is why women used to be the wards of their fathers, right? Or the wards of, their closest male relative, or the wards, not the chattel, not the property, but the wards of their husbands, or even their sons, their grown sons, right? Was, I think, to protect them from the consequences of bad decisions, right?
Okay.
Because if
Because
a
men
bad
know better.
decision, no,
No?
I think it was to protect them from taking the blame, right? From taking
Okay.
the blame, from taking it, being held accountable for the bad decisions, or for the things that happen to them, or the positions that they find themselves in, right? And now we see the Me Too movement is also trying to offload responsibility and accountability for women's conscious decisions. They're saying, well, these women didn't make those decisions, right? They were victimized, and they couldn't consent to sex with Harvey Weinstein or whoever, or Aziz Ansari or whoever. They couldn't consent because of the power imbalance, right? And so it's a complete offloading of responsibility and accountability off of women and onto men. So, but at the same time, men are no longer in authority over women, and they're no longer allowed to make decisions for women. So what you have
So
is
who is? Is it the feminist movement here?
what you have right now is, like, I've compared the situation with men who interact with women as sort of a gender version of the movie Get Him to the Greek, where you have the employee of the record company who wants to put on this concert with this flaky celebrity who takes him on all of these ridiculous adventures, refuses to stay on schedule. They miss flights. It's just uh, a giant nightmare for this guy, but all of the responsibility is on this guy to get this celebrity to the Greek theater, right? And he has no power to issue any orders. He has no authority to tell this celebrity what to do. And yet he's the one who's going to be held responsible at the end of the day if it doesn't work out. And that's
Was the, I guess my my concern is how this is impacting our relationships and how we move forward as a male, as a female, into relationships, communication with each other. There's a small splinter group that's out there. You're very familiar with it, called MGTOW,
Yeah.
right? Men going their own way. I don't know how big or how much impact that these guys have. Do you want to talk about that a little bit and whether or not that's representative of a fight back against all of this?
I think it's, for some of those guys, it's a work to rule action. It's, sort of like we're going to do the bare minimum that society demands of us until the rules change such that things are more fair. I think others are just sort of, well, once things got bad enough, we realized that they weren't ever that great for men. And so we're just not going to go back to the plantation, no matter how much more fair things get, no matter whether, things change. We still feel like men were essentially placed in the position of servants to women and to women's needs. And that's true to an extent, just as it's true in the other direction. But I think that the bigger problem is that there are a ton of men going their own way who have never heard of MGTOW. They've just dropped out. They've just stopped trying, and you can see it in enrollment levels for colleges and universities. And there was some speculation that well, maybe these men who aren't going to university are actually going into the trades, and there's no evidence to indicate that that's where they're going. So they're essentially doing the beer buddies and Xbox version of life, and this sort of failure to launch and Peter Pan stuff. And why would they want to grow up? It used to be that when you took on adult responsibility as a man and you took on responsibility for a family, you would get respect, you would get a certain amount of authority, you would have some guarantees in terms of what your life was going to look like long term. And now that's all gone, right? You don't even have a guarantee whether you're going to be allowed to see your children next year if your wife decides to leave you and she gets custody. So it's absolutely, there are just men who are just walking away, and they've never heard of me, and they've never heard of MGTOW, and they've never heard of any of it. So
this is pretty scary, and I don't know what the percentage is, or if there's any data on this that's suggesting how much of a impact this is having in our society. But as a father of two sons, one of whom is about to go to college, everything that we've been talking about this afternoon is really just downright scary for a father.
Do you think you could convince him to go to trade school, get an electrician's ticket, be a plumber? They can't outsource.
No, he's got his goals. He needs an education. He needs a diploma. He wants to go into communication. He's got his mind set on this. But without getting too personal here, I see a huge difference between kids his age and kids my age when I was back then in the 80s. Yeah. Okay. Oh, yeah. When I was 18, in the mid 1980s, if I wanted to go out on a date with a girl, I'd ask a girl out, I'd court her, would go to a movie, would do our thing, whatever it may be. And I didn't have to worry about any of this. Yep. This is a really scary, heavy weight now that's on this generation that's growing up, and I don't know how this ends. I mean, are you optimistic, pessimistic? Where do you stand on things?
I'm pretty pessimistic. And one of the things, I know a lot of people who are sort of optimistic about, sort of a social collapse happening under the weight of this sort of tearing apart of men and women and of families, right? And they're just like, I'm just waiting for the collapse, and then it'll all get better. And I'm thinking, yeah, well, not necessarily. If everything collapses to the point where we lose complete social cohesion and it descends into some kind of chaotic post-apocalyptic dystopia, we're never going to get back to where we are, right? All the easy oil and coal is gone. We need the infrastructure and the technology we already have in order to access what's left. And so there's no getting back. We climbed a ladder, we kicked it out from under us. And so if we can't make this work, then we're boned, right? So that's why I'm a pessimist.
Wow.
That's why I'm a pessimist is because I don't see any easy solutions. And I see what's happening now as the culmination of a 40-year campaign starting in the 1970s in academia with the first women's studies programs. So what we're looking at is it having spread throughout academia, and then from academia, the those who are sort of convinced into this mindset and this way of looking at the world, and men and women have gone on, these are activist disciplines. Activism is a core component of the curriculum in these courses and these programs. So what you have is a bunch of highly passionate, highly politically activated graduates who come out of these programs. And of course, they're going to want to proselytize. And so they go into journalism, and they go into communications, and they go into politics, and they go into, NGOs and lobby groups and all of that stuff. They go into education, they go into social work, they go into the law, they go into all of these areas where they can make the changes that they want to see and convince as many people as possible to their way of thinking, right? So we look at it right now as like, how did this happen, right? It seems to have infested this man against woman or woman against man mindset seems to have infested everything, right? Whereas that was the whole plan all along, or that was the inevitable conclusion of beginning those activist women's studies programs, feminist studies programs, really in the 1970s, right? It was the inevitable culmination of that, right? Is what we're seeing now. And we're just waking up to it.
It sounds like the tanker is so heavy. How do you steer it in another direction at this point?
It's like how do we uproot it? It's sort of like having roots growing under your house, and by the time your foundation starts to shift and let you know that something's wrong, all you can do is bulldoze it and start over again. So
this is really scary stuff. Karen, where can people find out more about this, the MRA, men's rights activist groups, and everything else that you've been talking about here?
You can go to avoiceformen.com. You can go to my YouTube channel. You can go to my blog, which I don't know if I can say the bad word. You can bleep it out, owningyourshit.blogspot.com. And you can find me on Twitter. You could look up Honey Badger Brigade or Honey Badger Radio on YouTube. That's a group of used to be an all-female group of men's rights activists, but now we've decided to go co-ed, and we have lots of podcasts on the news of the day from a pro-male perspective and an anti-feminist perspective. So,
Karen Straughan, greatly appreciate you taking the time, and stay warm up there this winter in Edmonton, Canada.
It's really not as bad as it could be. So.
Oh, I used to live in London, England, and they used to say when they talked about global warming, everybody took their aerosol cans and sprayed it up to the clouds to make it warmer. So
there you go.
Thanks so much for taking the time. And folks, if you're following us as well, you can follow our YouTube channel, Whiskey Politics, America's Voice News, Stitcher, Google Play, iTunes, give us that 5-star rating, and of course the Ricochet Audio Network. Very special thanks again to Karen Straughan, and we'll be back again next time with more fascinating interviews at Whiskey Politics.